In the theatre of history, some figures are tyrants and others are madmen. But only one man declared himself an emperor, inspired by Napoleon, and left behind a legacy so dark it was whispered he didn't just execute his enemies, he ate them. This is the story of a man whose hunger for power was matched only by the grotesque rumours of his appetite. A ruler who crowned himself in a ceremony of blood and diamonds, while his nation starved. Power can corrupt, but for jean-bédel Bokassa, it was a license to indulge in fantasies of grotesque grandeur. His journey from a decorated French soldier to the self-proclaimed emperor of Central Africa is a chilling saga of ambition, brutality, and unbelievable excess. It's a story that begins not with a crown, but with an orphan's tragedy. Born in 1921 in what was then French Equatorial Africa, Bokassa's childhood was shattered at the age of 6. His father, a village chief, was beaten to death by colonial authorities, and his mother, overwhelmed by grief, took her own life just a week later. Raised by missionaries, the young Bokassa was expected to become a priest, but he chose a different path, one of discipline and violence. In 1939, at 18, he joined the Free French Forces and launched a distinguished military career. He fought bravely in World War II and later served in Indochina, earning France's highest military honours, the Croix de Guerre and the Legion of Honour. By 1961, he had achieved the rank of captain. This was a man of proven courage, a decorated servant of France. But when he returned to his newly independent homeland, the Central African Republic, his ambition would take a much, much darker turn. The Central African Republic of the early 1960s was a nation struggling to find its footing. Independent since 1960, it was plagued by corruption and economic stagnation under its first president, David Dacko. Dacko, who happened to be Bokassa's cousin, invited the decorated captain home to build the nation's new army. Bokassa rose quickly, becoming the army's first colonel, and then its commander-in-chief. He watched as his cousin's government faltered, and as Dacko established diplomatic ties with communist China, a move that worried both Bokassa and his French patrons. Tensions grew between the two. Dacko, sensing Bokassa's rising influence, tried to counter him by creating a presidential gendarmerie. But it was too little, too late. Bokassa was convinced he was the only one who could save the country, and more importantly, fulfill his own destiny. On New Year's Eve of 1965, the trap was sprung. In what became known as the Saint Sylvester coup d'etat, Bokassa put his plan into motion. As President Dacko visited the plantation outside the capital of Bangui, Bokassa's troops, helped by his co-conspirator, Captain Alexandre Banza, seized control. They captured the head of the gendarmerie and took the capital with barely a fight. When Dacko returned after midnight, he was immediately arrested. Bokassa reportedly told his captured cousin, "I tried to warn you, but now it's too late." At 3 a.m. on January 1st, 1966, Bokassa's voice crackled over Radio Bangui, announcing the army had taken control. He abolished the constitution, dissolved the National Assembly, and declared himself the new president. He promised reforms and stability, but the mask of the benevolent savior would soon slip, revealing the face of a monster. Bokassa's rule quickly descended into a nightmare. He governed not with laws, but with whims, and his whims were invariably cruel. He became a law unto himself, a tyrant who seemed to relish the suffering of others. Public punishments became a grotesque form of theatre. Thieves were rounded up and beaten, sometimes with Bokassa himself looking on. On one occasion, after 3 convicted thieves were beaten, their mangled bodies were put on public display as a gruesome warning. To celebrate Mother's Day one year, he ordered the release of all mothers from prison, but, in the same decree, commanded the execution of any man imprisoned for killing his mother. 2 were put to death. His sadism wasn't just for public display. His lavish palace, the Villa Colongo, became a private den of horrors. Those who fell out of his favour, political rivals, accused criminals, or anyone who dared to question him, It was rumoured they were fed to his personal menagerie of crocodiles and lions, kept on the palace grounds for this very purpose. His nickname, the Butcher of Bangui, was well earned. But the most chilling rumours, the ones that would define his legacy, were whispers of cannibalism. These weren't just horror stories, they were accounts given by those who served him. His former personal chef later testified that he was frequently ordered to cook human flesh, which Bokassa kept in palace freezers. The chef described preparing a meal from a human carcass that Bokassa ate one morning. Other witnesses claimed that Bokassa loved to secretly serve human meat to visiting foreign dignitaries. During his coronation, he reportedly boasted to a French ambassador that the dish he had just eaten was human flesh. The stories painted a gruesome picture. A leader who not only killed his opponents, but consumed them, turning the ultimate act of domination into a feast. By 1976, being president for life wasn't enough for Bokassa. He had an idol whose grandeur he wanted to emulate, none other than Napoleon Bonaparte. And so, he decided to transform his impoverished, landlocked republic into the Central African Empire, with himself as Emperor Bokassa I. To announce his new status, he planned a coronation of such staggering expense that it remains one of the most bizarre spectacles in modern history. The ceremony, held on December 4th, 1977, cost over $20 million, an amount equal to a third of the country's entire annual budget. Everything was imported. A Parisian firm forged a 2-ton golden throne shaped like a massive eagle, which cost $2.5 million. They crafted a diamond-encrusted crown that alone cost $2 million, part of a $5 million jewelry bill. Bokassa's coronation robe, a monstrosity of velvet and ermine, was adorned with 785,000 pearls and over 1 million crystal beads, with a train that stretched an astonishing 39 feet. The Empress's gown was designed by the French house of Lanvin. The opulence was sickening. 60 brand new Mercedes-Benz cars were flown in to transport guests. 24,000 bottles of Moet and Chandon champagne, and thousands of cases of his favourite scotch were imported. Hundreds of pounds of rose petals were thrown in to be scattered at his feet. Even the food for the banquet was brought in from France. While his people lived in abject poverty, their leader sat on a gilded eagle throne, a crown of blood diamonds on his head, living out a deranged Napoleonic fantasy. No foreign heads of state attended, but France, his longtime enabler, sent a delegation and helped foot the bill. It was a grotesque fast, a ceremony that crowned not an emperor, but a monster. The story of Bokassa is a chilling reminder of how unchecked power can warp a human soul into something unrecognizable. The line between leader and monster can be terrifyingly thin. If you find these explorations into the darkest chapters of history compelling, take a moment to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next descent into the unforgettable. The empire, built on terror and illusion, couldn't last. The act that would finally sever Bokassa's ties with the world, and even with his French protectors, was one of shocking depravity. In early 1979, Emperor Bokassa issued a decree that all schoolchildren had to buy and wear expensive new school uniforms, which happened to be sold from a factory owned by one of his wives. For the impoverished families of the Central African Empire, this was an impossible burden. Students across the capital began to protest. Enraged that his imperial decree was being defied, Bokassa responded not with negotiation, but with brute force. He unleashed his imperial guard. In April 1979, hundreds of students, some as young as elementary school age, were rounded up and thrown into the notorious Ngbaga prison. What happened next was a massacre. In the overcrowded cells, many children suffocated. Others were brutally beaten. Reports from survivors and witnesses later compiled by organizations like Amnesty International painted a horrific scene. It was alleged that Bokassa himself went to the prison and personally participated in the killings, crushing the skulls of children with his cane. In total, an estimated 100 to 200 children were murdered for protesting the cost of a school uniform. The news of the Bangui children's massacre sent shockwaves of revulsion across the globe. For France, a government that had long tolerated Bokassa eccentricities and even financed his coronation, this was the final straw. Their monstrous creation had become an international embarrassment they could no longer afford. Bokassa's downfall was as swift as his rise was brutal. In September 1979, while he was in Libya seeking aid from Muammar Gaddafi, the French military launched Operation Barracuda. French paratroopers landed, secured the capital without a fight, and reinstated the very man Bokassa had overthrown 14 years earlier, David Dacko. The Central African Empire was dissolved, and the Republic was restored. Bokassa fled into exile, first to the Ivory Coast, and then, ironically, to a chateau he owned in France. In 1980, he was tried in his homeland and sentenced to death in absentia. Yet, in a bizarre twist, after 7 years in exile, he voluntarily returned to the Central African Republic in 1986, apparently believing he would be welcomed home. He was arrested the moment he stepped off that plane. He was put on trial again, this time in person. The court heard testimony of his reign of terror. He vehemently denied the charge of cannibalism, crying out, "I am not a cannibal!" Ultimately, he was acquitted of cannibalism, but found guilty of the murders of the schoolchildren and numerous other crimes. He was sentenced to death once again. But the final chapter was just as strange. His death sentence was commuted to life imprisonment, then reduced. In 1993, after serving less than a decade, he was released as part of a general amnesty. He lived out his final years in Bangui, declaring himself the 13th apostle of Christ, before dying of a heart attack in 1996. Even more astonishingly, in 2010, the government of the Central African Republic issued a posthumous pardon, officially rehabilitating him as a son of the nation recognized by all as a great builder. For some, a strange nostalgia for the brief, glittering era of the empire has taken hold. But for the world, and for the victims who endured his rule, the legacy of Jean-bédel Bokassa is written in blood. He remains a testament to the depth of human cruelty, a cannibal emperor who crowned himself in a spectacle of madness, and whose ghost still haunts a nation he once devoured. I'm Josh, and this has been The Villainous Vault. Thank you so very much for watching. Please like and subscribe if you found this video interesting. Leave us a comment down below. Have you heard of this man before? Have you heard of the atrocities that he was responsible for? Thank you again for watching. See you in the next one.